Hello, I'm Nathan Martin with the Divine Pollination Hive and the UnityProcess.com. In today's video, I'm going to be discussing the 4 stages of personal development and how they relate to interacting with zero-sum individuals, where zero-sum is win-lose interactions, where if somebody is successful, it means it came at the expense of somebody else. If this is something that interests you, stay tuned. The 4 stages of personal development: the physical, the emotional, the rational, and the moral philosophical. These 4 stages are based upon insights from Dylan Moore over at the Volitional Science Network and Robert Anton Wilson in his book Prometheus Rising. As we grow as an individual and integrated our fragmented sense of self through observing our thoughts, feelings, and behaviors, and reflecting on them, we grow from physically oriented beings into moral and philosophical beings. Each state of being transcends and includes the previous states of being, and see the next slide for that. And each state that we master makes us more and more powerful as natural beings. However, if after we have achieved a higher state of being through engaging in collaborative win-win interactions, we lower ourselves to engage in a power struggle at lower states of being, we bite the forbidden fruit, fall from grace, and therefore metaphorically leave the protection afforded to us by abiding in the Garden of Eden. Thus we lose our power and become susceptible to the consequences of the zero-sum game of dominance and submission, win-lose, and good and evil. So let's look at Holons and the 4 stages of personal development. The 4 stages of personal development can be likened to what Ken Wilber describes as Holons, where each state of being transcends and includes previous states of being. For example, molecules transcend and include atoms. Cells transcend and include molecules. Tissues transcend and include cells. And organs transcend and include tissues. In this case, we start with a physical. The emotional transcends and includes the physical. The rational transcends and includes the emotional. And the moral philosophical transcends and includes the rational. We therefore get to keep our previous states of being as we transcend them, and this expands our perception of reality. Transcendence does not leave behind the old, but rather expands and builds who we are upon the old. This is why destroying the past is so dangerous, to destroy our cultural and historical things, because they were white imperialists who were wanting to destroy whatever, and they were racists and bigots and whatever. So it's like, okay, yeah, when I was younger and I was more immature, but as I've grown from a physical into an emotional into a rational being, and now into a moral and philosophical being, I'm no longer a bigot because I've expanded who I am. I've expanded these things, and so there's no reason to attack the past. We should rather build upon the past, because when we build upon the past, our perception increases and we deepen as individuals. Let's explore leaving the Garden of Eden, what that means. So you start with a moral philosophical. We're moral and philosophical beings because we've built ourselves into that over time. Not saying everybody is this, but just for example, let's pretend you are. Then if you get into a rational argument, they defeat moral and philosophical arguments. Emotional arguments defeat rational, moral, and philosophical arguments. And physical arguments defeat emotional, rational, moral, and philosophical arguments. So if I'm trying to bring a moral discussion to the table, and somebody comes and they start trying to just argue science or rational, and they are no longer in the realm of the moral and the philosophical, they're going to win, and they're going to even appear to have won in front of the peers. So people looking at the discussion, they're going to actually say, oh, well, they won. Because you are leaving the discussion of the moral and the philosophical and you're dropping down into the rational. Now, also there's people that'll come with an emotional argument, and that can defeat both the rational and the moral philosophical. And again, if I use a gun, I'm going to beat the person that is, yelling at me and trying to shame me with their emotions and all that kind of stuff, because the gun trumps the emotions. If a moral, philosophical person leaves the safe confines of their transcendent state of being through having been suckered into a rational or an emotional argument, or lower yet, in a physical confrontation, they will easily be defeated by previous states of being. For as George Carlin admitted, never argue with an idiot. They will only bring you down to their level and beat you with experience. The same is true of somebody who is making a rational argument, who is being engaged by somebody who is making an emotional argument. An emotional person does not care about their reasons and facts. They only care about their feelings. Since we retain our power by staying within our highest achieved state of being, we must set a boundary on our personal rules of engagement and refuse to engage with others at lower states of being, except in self-defense. We must appeal to them to rise up to our level and engage with us where we are at, and let them know that we will only engage with them when they choose to look at the issue with the same expansive consciousness and lens that we are looking at the issue. To drop down into a lower tier of consciousness is to engage in a win-lose power struggle, but to engage at the same level of consciousness is to choose win-win collaborations and to grow as individuals. For example, the other day I was making an argument about Star Wars and how the underlying philosophical principles in Star Wars is very different in the Disney era than it was in the George Lucas era, and how right now in the new era what you have is you have postmodernism, deconstructionism, Marxism, intersectional feminism. These things are totally infiltrating and undergirding the new Star Wars movies. And what was replaced is the logocentric focus of George Lucas, where he was looking at the hero's journey, which is based on Joseph Campbell, and Joseph Campbell based his ideas and concepts on the work of Carl Jung, and they were very much Gnostic, mystical, and leaning on logocentric principles. But this new group of people that are writing the new Star Wars films, they're not anchored in logocentrism. They're anchored in deconstructionism and Marxism, intersectional feminism, and postmodernism. And what they're doing is they're destroying that core that George Lucas made so that they can build a new core that is based on these new underlying philosophical principles. And so I made an argument where I was talking about these two different things. And this person comes in and says, well, the Disney movies are, they're just trying to get to their new base and, the new fans and the old fans. And so they're just trying to, bring in new fans, and that's good. And we just need to give Disney a break and this kind of stuff. Well, he's trying to make a rational argument when I was making a philosophical argument. And he wasn't meeting me up in my philosophical argument. He was dropping down into a rational argument. And really, I have no standing there because I'm looking at the underlying principles and the heart and the soul, whereas he's looking at like the packaging, and he's trying to look at things at a more superficial level. So we're never going to get anywhere if I'm trying to discuss one thing and he's discussing another. And we're also not going to get anywhere if I leave my position of power, and the position of power is discussing the philosophical. And if I drop down now and start trying to talk about the rational argument that he brought, I'm not in my element, because actually I was more in my element when I was talking about why this is morally wrong what they've done to Star Wars. So we have to really put the boundary and set the boundary on ourselves and say we're not going to go there. So that wasn't necessarily aggressive, but I wasn't going to win down there either. Now there are people that come in that are going to act aggressive, and let's discuss that in the next slide. Let's give an example to this with mandatory vaccinations. So you start with a moral philosophical. The moral and philosophical argument is mandatory vaccinations violate one's right to informed consent. This is actually something that's even been set precedent with in the Nuremberg Code, in the Nuremberg trials. You cannot give somebody and force something, a medical procedure, on them without their informed consent. A rational argument defeats moral philosophical arguments. So, in the case of mandatory vaccinations, you say, well, it's immoral to vaccinate and violate one's right to informed consent. And they come in and say, yeah, but herd immunity. And there's science that says herd immunity. And now they're going to go into all their little scientific reasons. And if you try to engage there, you are leaving your place of the initial, your strength, your position of strength, which is mandatory vaccinations violate one's right to informed consent. Emotional arguments defeat rational, moral, and philosophical arguments. So let's say that I come up with some really good counterpoints to somebody's, the questionable science of herd immunity. And then they start saying, but think of the vaccinated children your unvaccinated child will infect. All of these people, all these vaccinated people are now going to get hurt because you haven't vaccinated your child. So now they're starting to make an appeal to emotions, and they're using emotional-based arguments. You're a horrible person. You should be ashamed of yourself. Look at all these people. You deserve to die. So now they're making all of these emotional arguments that, and no matter what science you bring, it doesn't matter. And no matter what facts you bring, they're not going to listen because they're now in an emotional argument. And then finally we get to this place of mandatory vaccination laws, medical kidnapping, and forced immunization, because that's the physical argument. It defeats the emotional, the rational, the moral, and the philosophical. Now you have these laws, and now the rule of force, the weight of the government is now brought against people. And if they don't vaccinate their child, you're going to have medical kidnapping, where they're going to steal the child and they're going to force that, and they're going to take the child away and give it to foster care in the name of the safety of the child. They're forcing immunizations. They're giving $1,000 fines or jail time. And I promise you, if you go to jail, then they're going to hold you down and they're going to immunize you there. They're not going to let you be in there because most jails have this immunization policy where if you're not immunized, you're going to have to be immunized. So we can see how when you're trying to make a mandatory vaccination, a case against mandatory vaccinations and how they violate one's right to informed consent, we really need to stay in the realm of the philosophical and the moral. Look, it's immoral to force somebody to do something, period. It's against their consent. But science, no. But you're a bad person, no. But we're going to force you and kidnap and do all these other things, no. We're not going to go there. It's wrong. It's my right to say no. You can't tell me that I have to say yes, and you are violating my rights if you do so. So we are in our power when we are standing and staying and tethering ourselves, anchoring ourselves in the moral and the philosophical. The defensive use of force. As already mentioned, we may at times need to defend ourselves from those in less integrated states of being. But to accomplish this, we cannot use a moral philosophical argument against their use of physical force, emotional force, or even their hyper-rational desire for empirical proof devoid of philosophical context. In situations where they have escalated the exchange in an aggressive manner, where they refuse to rise up to our level of exchange in collaborative discussion, we must stand up in our own moral and philosophical principles and meet their rational attack with our own rational defensive parry. Meet their emotional aggression with an equalizing use of emotional defensive force, and meet their physical use of aggressive force with our own use of defensive physical force. In this, we are standing in our overall integral and holistic state of being by anchoring ourselves to our moral and philosophical principles, and then defending ourselves from their aggressive behaviors in a language that they understand. We must always communicate our boundaries to people in a language that they understand, especially with predators. This is the only way that they will learn to respect us. As John Locke basically stated in his second treatise on government, if they place themselves in a physical state of war with us, we have the right to treat them like a beast of prey and destroy them. If somebody comes at me in an aggressive manner, in an attempt to dominate me with irrationality, I will work them over in a rational manner that lets them know who they're dealing with, and that they must respect my personal boundaries. If they come at me in an emotionally aggressive manner, in an attempt to dominate me with their emotionally charged accusations and rhetoric, I will undress them emotionally and humiliate them so that they will realize that they must respect my personal boundaries. If they come at me physically in an attempt to dominate me through the use of aggressive force, then I will respond in kind and treat them like the animal that they are showing themselves to be. Exercising my right to defend my personal property and my right to self-determination is my moral prerogative as a sovereign individual. It's my right. I get to defend myself against them. And see, we're often worried that we aren't strong enough to defeat them. We're not strong enough to defend ourselves because they have the weight of government, they have the weight of the crowd, they're a giant collective, and this giant collective is coming after us. How are we going to do this? How are we going to stand in our power? And I say that moral individuals are more whole and therefore infinitely more powerful than physical, emotional, and rational individuals. Let's take a look at this. So a moral and philosophical individual is very integrated. They are greater than an individual who just has physical force. So you look at a police officer, maybe they're just enforced, they're just an enforcer. A moral philosophical individual is greater than an emotional individual, somebody who's developed their emotional capacity. A moral philosophical individual is greater than a rational individual. So in all of these cases, they are more integrated, more whole. They are a more powerful person. The person who only has force, they're actually pretty weak. An emotional individual, they're also very weak. And rational people, while they're much stronger than emotional and physical people, they're also not nearly as strong as a moral, philosophical individual. If I'm defending myself against one of these people, a physical person, emotional person, a rational person, because I have integrated previous states of being, the physical, the emotional, and the rational is all within me. So I don't have to be worried about losing a part of myself. If I'm tethering myself and I'm anchoring in my moral and philosophical rights and the truth and these things, I am a spiritual being. I've developed myself as a spiritual, natural person. Then when somebody comes at me in a physical way or an emotional way or a rational way, if I deal with them in the rational way, if I deal with them in an emotional way, or I deal with them in a physical way, while still maintaining my moral and philosophical wholeness and distinctiveness, they have nothing to do. They have no way to harm you. They have no way to hurt you. And it's, you think this whole might makes right thing, but might makes right when you drop down. Look, I'm not going to have a rational discussion with a rational individual when I'm trying to make a moral argument. I'm going to say, you need to come up to me. And otherwise, I walk away. Same with an emotional person or a physical person. I'm not going to have these conversations with these people. Now, if they get aggressive and they attack me, then I will deal with it. Then I will deal with them. So if I'm like, I'm only going to have this conversation, they're like, oh, you're going to have this conversation at the rational level or the emotional level or the physical thing, and they get aggressive, then I'll have to deal with them. But as long as I don't really care what they believe. I can walk away from any conversation when they're not going to stay in the moral and the philosophical. I'm staying in my power. And if I go walk away and they decide to use force, either at the rational, the emotional, or the physical level, and I'm going to address it right there and I'm going to deal with it and how they're dealing with me. So if they're using force, I'm going to deal with it by responding with force. If they're initiating emotional force or using rationalness as an aggressive way of being forceful against me and aggressive, then I will deal with it at those levels. But as long as they're not being aggressive and they're just trying to drop me down, I don't have anywhere to go. I don't have to talk to them. I can walk away. It's no big deal. I have no emotional attachment to getting them to believe my way. I'm not going to leave my moral and philosophical underpinning just to, try to talk to them because they're not bright enough or they're not integrated enough to understand me. So I hope this makes sense. If you have any questions, please let me know in the comments section below. Have a good one. If you enjoyed this video, please click like. If you'd like to stay up to date with my videos, please subscribe. If you would like to be notified via email whenever I release a new video, please click the bell next to subscribe. If you have any comments or questions or would like to go into a dialogue about this topic, please leave them in the comments section below. I'm Nathan Martin with the Divine Pollination Hive and the UnityProcess.com. Be safe, be sovereign, be well.